Hello. Setting your intention. I'm really excited to talk to you about setting your intention because when we set our intentions when it comes to our dogs, the way we think about our dogs and the way we behave towards our dogs, we release so much of our own baggage, our own expectations, our own blame for our dogs, and all of the negative feelings that we feel about our dogs because of the behaviour that they might be performing that we don't like to see. But setting your intention is also even more exciting because once you do that, you actually see the truth of every single situation to do with your dog and the behaviour. And that's really, really actually very empowering, because when you're seeing the truth, you're not tainting it or labelling anything or putting rules or boundaries or expectations on what you're seeing. It's the truth, and you can actually see through all of that fog and all of that white noise and all of those distractions that you have created for yourself by having expectations about your dog, by blaming your dog for their behaviour. You actually cut through all of that and see the truth of the situation. And then you start asking the most important question, which is, why is my dog doing the behaviour that they're doing in that situation? Once you start asking yourself that question, instead of saying, how can I get my dog to sit? How can I get my dog to be quiet? How can I get my dog to stop barking? When we actually look at why, we can also feel our emotion shift into something that feels so much more positive and rewarding for us, because we're actually wanting to find the answers, not create problems. And the problems that we always create are problems for our dogs because we hang on to the expectations. We want the control. We want to make the decisions. But let's take a look at a really common example. And this is one that I hear very, very commonly. And it's an example that happens every day. And it happens usually when you come home from work, or you come home from somewhere where you've been somewhere for a while. Your dog hasn't seen you for a while, or your dog might be very excited to see you if you've just gone, you've just left the house for half an hour. But then that says more about the emotional state about your dog, and that's something that I'd like to talk to you about in the future as well. But we need to really first look at common examples like the excitement levels of your dog when you're coming home, when you haven't seen them. Now, if we think about our dog, that, our dog might have been sitting at home for hours with nothing to do, and then, of course, you come home, they're very, very excited to see you. They might jump on you, and then what you do is you might push them down, you might physically reprimand them, you might actually verbally reprimand them, you might punish them for that. But when you actually look at the truth of that situation, we can't expect our dog to behave in any other way because they are so happy to see us, and their day, those hours or that period of time being left on their own, if they've had nothing to do, nothing to keep them mentally occupied, then they're going to be very, very excited when you, the main stimulus in their life, is coming home. So they're going to greet you in the way that, A, their emotions are reflecting, which is very excited, very happy to see you, but also they're going to respond in a way that could be exaggerated if you're going to inadvertently reinforce that or reward that behaviour by pushing them down, by verbally reprimanding them, because that is attention from your dog's point of view. So And then if your dog doesn't listen to you, because you think your dog's, being stubborn or wanting their own way, then that's another myth, if you like, or that's another way of thinking that is then going to hang on to the expectations and the blame that you are going to have for your dog. So having an intention means not just to set yourself on a pathway with a goal or an objective in mind or a purpose. I want you to start thinking of an intention as a lifestyle and a state of mind. So, for example, with Marco, now Marco is a rescue dog and I've had him for a number of years. But little Marco, I am completely aware that he was most likely surrendered for his behavioural issues, which were, well, he still does have them. He has an underlying anxiety and he also does bark. So for me, that's a very difficult situation to try to manage Marco's barking. Unfortunately, we have to manage that with a number of things. But the reason why I'm telling you this is because I have to look at life from Marco's, well, not so much have to, I want to look at Marco's life from his perspective, because if you're living with an underlying anxiety, then of course that's very personal to you, but it's also a medical condition and it's also something that affects our dog's emotional states. And there are so many dogs across the world that do have underlying anxieties, which is a result of many, many different things. And that includes their environment, what they've learnt previously, their current environment, their previous environment, their life as a puppy, whether they were socialised adequately or not, and also the health of their mother and the environment of their mother and the stress that she was under when she was actually pregnant with Marco and his siblings. So there's so many things that we have to consider, and so that's why we also need to look at our dog's behaviour in context for that situation. And so when we start getting back onto the track of setting the intention, my intention is to help Marco through his anxiety and his daily life as best as I can by giving him as many stimulating things for him to be empathetic with him, to empathise with him, and see his life through his eyes. And I would probably say that if you are watching this video, you're probably somebody who may have taken your puppy to preschool, so you've done some training, or you might have actually had some training with your dog, an adult dog, but you might actually not be having great success with that. And I would say that this is really interesting, because when we're just teaching behaviours to our dogs, like asking them to sit or stand or relax, what we're doing is we're actually just robotically asking them to do something that we'd like them to do in a particular situation. But it's so much more than that. And so when we actually have our intention, set our intention of considering our dog's emotions in that circumstance, and which is related to the behaviour that they're performing, then we actually then can see that if there's lots of kids running around, for example, and it's very noisy and your dog is barking and running around with the kids, well, it's no use trying to ask your dog to sit in that environment, because it's just incompatible with his excitement levels. So what I'm trying to explain, or what I'd like you to try to see, is when we actually shift our intention to wanting to help our dogs adjust to our lifestyle and everyday situations, then we actually start seeing the bigger picture when our dogs aren't responding to us in a way that we'd like them to. And the perfect example is the one where I talked about our dogs jumping up on us when we're coming home when they haven't seen us for a while. But let's just think about if we've actually had our dog jumping up on us to say hello, and we've been out in the backyard gardening and we've got our dirty old clothes on, look, and we just don't really do anything about it. We actually hug our dog and say, oh, hello, Marco, or hello, whatever your dog's name, insert your dog's name in there, in that sentence. But if we think about that situation, then it's okay for our dogs to jump up on us in that situation, but then we're actually telling them it's not okay in another situation where their excitement levels are just as high. It's just that we have different clothes on that we don't want to get dirty. And so then we blame our dog for not knowing that, but it's really our deficiency and our fault. So we should actually not be blaming ourselves, but we should be taking responsibility for our contribution to our dog jumping up onto us to say hello, if we've let them or invited that or rewarded with a pet or a praise or even just pushing or a verbal reprimand. If we've actually done that in the past, we're still rewarding our dogs from their perspective. So rather than tell you how to deal with that situation, that's not going to help you actually understand the context and be able to see the situation and be able to then manage it yourself. So what I prefer you to start focusing on now is just thinking about your dog from their perspective, their life from their point of view, and ask yourself, if you don't like the behaviour that they're performing, what do you think might be the reason that they are doing that? Can you think back to times where you might have inadvertently rewarded them with a pet or a praise or a hug or something like that, or attention when they've been doing that behaviour? And have you actually changed the rules and the goalposts for your dogs? Have you changed, the goalposts from yes, that's okay to now it's not okay? So when we set our intention to set our intentions, our motivation is to then make sure that we're always observing why things are happening, not asking how can I get my dog to. And so that's a really powerful concept to try to embody and just to try to adopt in your lifestyle. But I'd like you to do a little exercise, which is very interesting. I think it's very interesting. If you have a pen and paper, that's great. But if not, pop off and grab a pen and paper, because this is a really good exercise and I think you'll get a lot out of it if you accept your responsibility and your part in contributing to your dog's undesirable behaviour, what you think is undesirable. All right, so the exercise is just to think of 3 adjectives that best describe your dog. And when you write those down, I want you to take note of the emotion that you're feeling when you're writing those words down, and also the situations that have sprung to mind or the events that spring to mind when you're writing those, when you're thinking of those adjectives to describe your dog. Because when you think about your emotions, when you're writing those words down, if it's coming from a place of frustration, blame, expectations, then your intention, then we need to shift our mindset to an intention of realising that there's always a valid reason for our dog's behaviour. And so by doing this little exercise, it's going to help you understand where your emotion is coming from when you are thinking about your dog. Because if you're having emotions of frustration or anger or resentment about your dog when you're thinking of those words, to describe your dog, then that's something that we really need. We really need to help you to shift your thinking and get you to reconnect again with your dog. So that's what I would probably say. I would say if you're coming from a place of frustration or anger or blame, then it's really important that you take some time to just reconnect with your dog. And, but doing just something nice with your dog that is really lovely and meaningful, and something heartfelt that you really enjoy with your dog, and something that you did with your dog or you saw your dog doing that you just had just such a lovely feeling, and just a feeling of love and reconnection with your dog, because that's so important. It is so important when we consider how many dogs across the world are surrendered to shelters because of their behavioural problems. And once again, the behavioural problems aren't being classified by the dogs, because from the dog's point of view, they're completely justified. There's always a valid reason for our dog's behaviour. So, these problems are being classified by us, the humans, the people who are setting the rules and the boundaries, and the lack of choice and the lack of freedom for our dogs. So this is it's a simple exercise, but it reveals so much about how we feel about our dogs. And if you can hold on to that piece of paper that you've written those 3 words on, those 3 adjectives, then go and reconnect with your dog and just do something nice with your dog and reward them for doing something that you really like. You like seeing them do, like just sitting down quietly with you, or even just in a sit when you've asked them to sit, or even just walking nicely on the leash, giving them a pet on the chest and say, well done, you're such a great dog. Or even if they're sitting on their leash, they're on leash and they're sitting really nicely, or just standing nicely, and another dog and another dog guardian walks past, and your dog is absolutely okay with that, and is comfortable in that situation. That's lovely behaviour to reward, and let your dog know that that's wonderful, and when we start rewarding our dogs for the behaviours that we really like them to do, we then find that helps to shift the way we think and the way we behave towards our dogs. So this is a bit of a disjointed video. It went off on a bit of a tangent, but look, the main thing is when you do this exercise, depending on what you might describe your dog as stubborn, naughty, rude, selfish, annoying, stupid, an idiot. These sorts of things. If you're actually thinking about your dog like this, I would really love you to just hang on to that piece of paper and then do something really, really meaningful with your dog that is going to bring you guys back together, just to reconnect. And then you'll start seeing your dog for who they are, which is a dog that really wants to be with their human family unconditionally. And that's a lovely sentiment. So I think we'll finish there, and we'll talk again soon.